Hello, this is Bill again, and welcome to Module 2 of our seminar. It's all about letters and lettering. Our raison d'etre, assigned by our industry's definition, is a device that can display any symbol, pictogram, or illustration, but generally consists of an arrangement of letters that identify a specific object, activity, or location. As such, lettering is the essence of our business, and a thorough knowledge of its many facets is an important reason for our success. It's our reason for being, a translation of our very fancy title. I've doodled most of and illustrated most of what you'll see on these modules, and in this case, I wanted to show how letters developed over the years, how the typography was actually fashioned in large part by the tools that inscribed them, engraved, or applied them. And in some instances, of course, when they chiseled into. All of the letters that we have, the fonts, have to a large degree come from those very tools: the needle, the reed, the quill, the brush, and the stylus, of course, into papyrus clays, I should say into clay tablets, and the chisel in carving into marble or limestone. We could get fancy and technical and discuss the letters in technical terms, and because letters do have an anatomy and they do have names for all the parts that I've outlined there in red. And I tried to put a little humor in there with Professor Alf Einstein to show you that they do have a life and they do have names to their anatomy. But most importantly, in my preoccupation in the sign business, I have a very simple principle when designing signs. If it's not legible, it's useless. And this is one of the examples of many that you'll find anywhere. People put their egos and their pride in their letters that they've designed on a business card, and they assume automatically they can be easily translated into a channel letter. That's not the case. Here's a prime example in two different situations. One in direct sunlight, and the shadows just exacerbate the situation. Even the best of designers who don't understand the importance of contrast make a blue letter a monolithic entity, not realizing that you do not study and look at a sign head on. That the front view syndrome is what I call it. You have to always look at signs. How do they look like at an angle? From a pedestrian's point of view, you're trying to reach the pedestrian, the observer that's walking along or even driving. Had these letters had a white return, their legibility would have increased tenfold. Here's another example, even frontally. It has difficulty in being discerned. Fortunately, we have a logo here, RBC, that compensates for it, so that in effect the letters on the side have become sort of like an underline. Definitions of lettering. Calligraphy is penmanship. I love calligraphy. I started my love for letters with calligraphy, and that is due in part when I started school in Belgium. We were given styluses to work on slate boards, and we were taught how to keep things in line. We learned how to parallel draw, and then we were given pens. When you graduated to a pen and inkwell, you were so proud. It was unbelievable. Lettering is also draftsmanship, or the art of drawing letters. This is when you start making posters or designing posters. That's so critical, and we'll show you that in a moment. Typography is the arranging of letters. That comes from Gutenberg, when they started making letters out of lead and woodcuts and so on, how to arrange them. That's some movable units invented by Gutenberg, and in fact 400 years earlier, but really by the Chinese. Except with 3,000 characters, it became impractical. Digital typography, anyone with a computer can do it. This is what we have today. It is so easy, and just about anybody can create a sign, but doesn't mean that it's correct or it's right. Really, it isn't. When I started in the sign business, I was given a book, a marvelous book, printed in 1918. And not that my lettering wasn't good, but I had in my training in printing, it was to work at it mechanically, and I lost a little bit of that spontaneity. That was brought back to me with this gift, this book, this marvel that I cherish and I still have to this day. And it really puts you through the essence of what lettering is all about. Throughout all of these strokes that I practiced diligently, because I had to make layouts very quickly, and with pastels. In the sign business, we started comps, the rough comps, with pastel sticks. And believe me, you could learn a lot by spacing when you practice these techniques. These will just go through quickly. For commercial purposes, this is how when I started making posters on the side, I used a fitch brush. I've painted signs on windows and a wide variety of surfaces with one-shot paint. I based it all on my abilities and my studying of this particular book. Here's an example again of how you can create with one stroke. Today you can take your basic felt pen and create the same things. It's amazing what you can do with a felt pen, and I often sketch with a felt pen in order to rough out the spacing. Continue. Here we go. Now, when I tell people the importance of to illustrate the importance of lettering or the knowledge of lettering and what it does for you to put in a spatial context, I describe old movies, old films. Every silent film that was ever made was not made from a typographer, did not come from a typographer. There were lettering specialists. These were people that lettered because the screen and the lenses of the camera, they had distortions. And these chaps learned how to accommodate the distortions in a 16 millimeter film. Here are examples of how the influence of movie posters to signs over the years. Every one of these posters I will go through are entirely hand lettered. There is no typography or movable type in any of them. And they're spectacular only because they learned to accommodate the four-color process. They were able to sketch into it and incorporate and make the letters part of the design, part of the narrative that they wanted the poster to tell you. They look at Casablanca. That is so evocative of the time in the 30s and the 40s. That makes you want to go see that movie again. I've seen it 60 times. Basically, the sign designer of today, like you can define with a little mouse on the side, which is unfortunate. This is what I had to work with when I was a sign designer. I had gouache. I had a wide variety of nibs. I had, of course, my instruments, my compasses, my protractors, angles, French curves, flexible, you name it. And right underneath is my favorite book that I cherish so deeply, that lettering book. When you learn how to letter, when you learn how to master the art of lettering, you can sense what you need, a space, and you can do a lot of things. My abilities that I learned in printing and touching photographs, I was able to gouache. This is the Photoshop in gouache, if you will, 1966. To 3D or not to 3D the letter. The questions are always there. Fortunately, again, we're going into an important transition in the sign business. We can now skinny up that sign because we no longer have to contend with the 5 or 11-inch depth that made things difficult sometimes to make a sign legible vis-a-vis its background. Size and characteristics, serif or non-serif. Well, the old rules of thumb that a upper and lower case is read, all caps is spelled, and non-italic, avoid serifs. Those are things that are important to factor in, but there are such a variety of types that you have to put it in context. Thickness of substrates, types of polymer. There's a PC, acrylic. We will touch on that when we get into the lighting. And thermoforming, there's a question of definition. and graphics, the pre-applied vinyl, pigmented plastic. These all have a role. How you execute this have an impact and an effect on the type of letters you choose. Here is an example. For example, the devil is in the details. Depending on the size of the letter, depending on the surface area, the details of a particular letter can be affected. And I'm trying to show you, what I try to illustrate here is the sharpness that you might desire from a particular letter will depend entirely on the thickness of the substrate and the size of the substrate. So you have to factor that in when you're designing your letters. How sharp can it be based on the sizes required? What type of a sign? If it's a channel letter, if it's thermal formed, you might not get what the client might expect from his super ultra sharp or precise font. How you locate and where you locate your lettering to maximize legibility is so critical. This might have sounded or looked like a brilliant idea. We're going to spend these letters up in the air. Well, you know, it speaks for itself. There's another example on the right hand side. And orientation. If it's facing north and the sign is always in the shadow, what's it going to look like? It'll look good at night, but during the day you won't see it. It's camouflaged. I call these camouflage designs. And again, the choice of font on the right hand side, it might be a nice block letter, but if it doesn't have proper breathing space in and around it, it's illegible. You can't see it. And somebody had the brains to put a little fascia sign underneath and make it smaller and make it even more illegible. So this is why context, style of lettering is so critical. Where you put it, how you read it, it's extremely important. Certain signs only take on their life and become valid only at night. Here's an example. Again, we were picking on our poor RBC. They're such good people, but this of course has changed since then. They've become much more legible. But would you know that the middle one is a courtyard? This is a critical. It's a hotel. It's on a side street, has an entrance. If it weren't for a sign way past the building, you would know that that's the courtyard. Ambient light is very, very critical. Now here's an excellent study of both ambient light and the internal illumination. The bay is internally illuminated and also subject to ambient light that causes these odd reflections, so that you don't know. You might assume that there's two different types of LEDs. H&M is an example. Of course, there's a different context in the mall, because you're walking, it's not as critical to be seen from a distance, but it's part of your environment, and it's also the sign has to have an aesthetic value. If it's glaring at you and it's got these different highlights, it might be annoying. Aritzia is an excellent example of how you maximize visibility and legibility. This is just a straightforward black background, black painted glass with LED panels right behind it, so that it is completely safe from any outside glare. It stands on its own. Foreign plastic effect has an effect of the foreign plastic effect has an effect on resolution. And here's just another example, again dependent on size and depth. The size and depth of the letter that you choose will affect its legibility. Here's the evolution of the channel letter. It hasn't really changed, other than the fact that it's deepened and thickened in order to allow the distance between the neon and the plastic face. And today we're reducing the profile and skinning it up. When town planners ban push-through signs and say that you need to put these goosenecks, I always bring out some old photographs that I have of the original sump glass. This is a glass sign that was available near the end of the 19th century, just to go show you that they were ahead of their time. This is a personal guideline for channel letters. This is what I look for. I always evaluate legibility. the returns. The returns are critical. To me, a return is just a mechanical device to hold a light source. It's always been. My focus has always been to look at the face. The face is the real character and the real integrity of the word type. That's what you have to focus on. Whatever is behind that letter, it could be 5 inches, 2 inches, 3 inches, or now in the future probably 1 inch. Your focus should be on the face itself. These are some alternative treatments done in the 60s and 70s for how to give a letter its own personality, if you will. These are techniques that we will discuss eventually. Of course, here's another example of how the ambient light can affect legibility, and another one of how one part of the graphics can stand out to create an attraction. These are open-faced neon channel letters. They were open, the neon was exposed, and had high legibility. At night, it was only the light that illuminated, and it was extremely effective. This is a push-through glass letter, slump glass as it was called. Incandescent lamps illuminated these push-through letters, and that little fox that you see in that globe, that was actually painted on glass. And these are nondescript letters. Again, we had a term for it. We haven't used this in ages, only because the computer sort of eliminated that expression by virtue of all those fonts being available. But in our day, if you didn't find it, you created that letter. This is a classic bastard lettering. We call them bastard lettering because if you looked into your type book, your typography book that every department had, you wouldn't find it. Here's another example of a nondescript letter. You'd be hard pressed to find this in any typography book, but it worked. It created an ambiance, and with the freedom that the designers had in the 50s and 60s, with the sheet metal worker being able to perform miracles, we were able to do these things in a flash. Weeding latex masking film. Panned and embossed plastic faces had a different process from what we have today with vinyl. Every color had to be individually masked and then cut out and spray painted. This is a little, I have a touch of nostalgia for this one because when I started at National, I had to design it and then help the pattern department ponce it, that is to say perforate the paper, go on to Tiffin panels that were 16 inches apart. They were always scrubbed and reused, and then help the team on the shop floor paint them. I would do the cartooning and the detailing of whatever. In this case, I didn't make this particular the illustrations, but I've done a whole bunch of them. I would be working on the arty-farty parts, and the rest would be doing the mask colors and fit it in. A panel like that would be colored and done in one day. Two men would be able to paint and finish this thing in one day. The paint was barely dry, and these Tiffin panels would be taken off the boards, put on the truck, and rushed to site to install. To this day, we recently revived the Tiffin panels for a shopping center in Chicoutimi, a whole bunch of them. They still work extremely well. Paint on canvas, well, that's just to go show you that even if PVC didn't exist in those days, old canvas did. And national advertising signs, their specialty was advertising and promoting movies of the days of that time. These are all silent flicks, considered classics. Not all signs were illuminated. Most of the chains, the early chains for United Cigar Stores, they used a product called glass weld. It's like a porcelain enamel. They covered the whole storefront, and we would apply formed letters directly on the storefront. And this, I will finish off this segment, this module, with one of my favorite people in the days that I admired, a company that I admired, that had the best craftsmen for thermoforming plastic letters and creating wood letters, gold leaf letters. And let's just finish you off to finish this module off by showing that there was a lot of workmanship and skill in the sign business when I started. Thank you, and looking forward to Module 3.